Welcome to Fun and Fundraising, everybody, the podcast where we talk with people behind top nonprofit galas and signature fundraising events to showcase how they positively transform their communities. I am your host, Rob Giardinelli, and today I'm excited to have a special guest. It is Karen Hughes, and she is the CEO of an organization called Vogel in North Texas, and they provide homeless services for children and families. And we're going to talk a little bit about a couple of interesting topics today. One is we're going to talk a little bit about their recent annual art performance event, but we're also going to talk about rebranding because they've recently changed their name and they've gone about a little bit of a different branding perspective. And we're going to talk a little bit about that and how a top organization does that effectively, and and all the other things that go along with that. So with that, Karen, welcome, and we're so excited to have you on as a guest today.
Oh, hello. It's great to be here.
Well, thank you. Thank you for being here. And can you start by just talking a little bit about what the mission of Vogel is?
Sure. Vogel's mission is to help young children and their families prevent and overcome the traumatic effects of homelessness and poverty.
Fantastic. So, talk a little bit about, I want to delve a little bit more into like how you got involved with the organization. So what was your path to, getting to Vogel and, sharing a little bit about your story?
Sure. Well, I started out as a kindergarten teacher in Houston many, many years ago. Then actually owned my own child care center in Houston. And then from there, I moved to Houston Community College, where I taught early childhood courses and also set up the lab school and child care centers on campus of Houston Community College downtown. And then from there, I moved to the National Association for the Education of Young Children and did about 10-year stint in DC and was their chief operating officer. They are the accrediting body and major professional organization for anybody that works in early childhood across the country. And from there, I was recruited to a nonprofit in Alexandria, Virginia called the Catania Center. And I worked there in early childhood and other children's programs. And then my husband and I met my husband while I was up there. We adopted my son from Ethiopia and we wanted to come back home to Texas. And so the Vogel Alcove board, they did a search and found me in DC, and I was ready to come back to Texas. And so that's kind of how I got back here. I had not worked with homeless children and thought I knew early childhood till I got back here and started working with 100% of children in trauma and poverty, which was definitely a learning experience and continues to be a learning experience for me every single day. So that's kind of how I got back here.
Now, how long have you been with the organization now?
About 14 years.
Oh, so you've been there a good amount of time. I'd love to hear, a couple of things. One is, can you talk a little bit about over the last 14 years, and this will kind of lead into the rebranding question, but talk about how the organization has evolved since you initially started there.
Well, when I got here, they had three priorities. One was they had plans to build a new building. And so we started off on that track, started the capital campaign to build the new building. Actually, in the middle of that, Dallas ISD closed 10 buildings across the city. And so we actually had the opportunity, instead of building our own building, to remodel an old Dallas ISD building. It's over 100 years old. And so that's where we find ourselves now. So that was a big priority. And when we moved here, we doubled our capacity and we're able to bring operations and programming under the same roof. We also had a goal of diversifying our income, because at that point, our arts event, which we'll talk about later, it was like over 50% of our income. So I had the task to do that. And then also to look at data and how we were collecting data on our programs and being able to operate based on that. So those were my first charges as I started as the CEO. Since then, we've done, I think the arts events now let's see, it's about 1.1 million of 8.5 million, which is going to be, so we've definitely diversified income, and data is our day-to-day. And not only have we moved and remodeled this building, we are in an expansion program. We opened a new site in December in an emergency shelter, a child care center on the first floor of that center. And then we just got the certificate of occupancy for a new site that will open in South Dallas. So a lot has happened in those 14 years.
Talk a little bit about how did, especially, with what you deal with homelessness and with trauma, talk a little bit about, and I'm not a dweller on this, but I think with your, with what you all do, it's particularly pertinent. How has COVID shifted what you all have done service-wise and how you've done community outreach over the last 5 years or so?
Well, with COVID, we never stopped. We never closed down. We were considered essential because of the families that were with us. We have about half and half of our families are virtually homeless. They're living in shelters or in domestic violence shelters or something like that. And half of them are recovering from being homeless and in their own houses. So actually, during COVID, the people that were in shelter were actually taken care of because they were literally locked down in those facilities being taken care of by the people that run those facilities. It was our families that were out, single moms in their houses, apartments by themselves. And so we had to really kind of shift everything we were doing. We did a 6-week food program where we delivered meals every single day to all the families in the community, which is something we normally don't do. Then we began to bring kids back, but we really never stopped during COVID. And I have to say that our donors stepped up to the plate. We did not suffer financially at all during COVID, because I think it was because they knew we were continuing on and we were fighting the good fight, and they came to the rescue. And so we did okay during COVID. We did have to, in terms of the event, that was our COVID hit in March and our event was scheduled for April. So that didn't go well, but that was that. And the next year, we actually did the event. We did it outside. So there were 2 years there we had to kind of change things because of COVID. But as an overall organization, Vogel fared very well through COVID. And it was really just because of the 37-year history of stewarding our donors, and they came to the rescue.
Well, I'm glad you brought up the importance of having, and it starts with two things. One is it's a steady base of donors that you can count on, which, you obviously have with the organization being around for nearly 40 years, but it's also your leadership because you've been there for 14 years and led through some very interesting times, because the last 5 years, I think, there was no school, there was no course that anyone ever took for that. So we all kind of had to figure it out. I'm glad though that you brought up, I think that's a good segue into the rebranding part of, what you all have done. So you recently rebranded your name. So talk a little bit about the decision process to do so, as well as some of the pros and cons of rebranding an organization's name from something that's longstanding in the community.
Well, when I first arrived, I mean, the word, the Vogel alcove has historical significance because Vogel was the name of one of the founders. We had two founders, Doris Budner and Thelma Vogel. And Thelma was killed in a plane crash in the early 90s. And so after that, they named the organization after her. So there's historical significance to the word Vogel. And then the alcove, when we started, they started with 10 kids in an alcove in the downtown family shelter. So it also has significance. So when I first got here, we did Boston Consulting came in and did a major $1 million in-kind thing for us and looking at the community and all of, our awareness and all of that. And their response back was, you need to change your name. Nobody knows what it is. And I said, I was only been, I guess, CEO a couple of years at that point. And I was like, I am not taking on changing the historical name of the organization. So at that point, we kind of just, thank you for that recommendation. Let's look at the other things. But as we continued on, every time I hired a PR firm for anything, that was the thing is you need to change the name, you need to change the name. So as we began to look at these we're going to actually have 4 sites. I had to determine, well, what are we going to call these? Internally we were calling them, Vogel North and Vogel South or Redbird or whatever it was. And I was like, but to the world, what are we going to call these? And so I hired a branding company to help figure that out. And so again, they came back and said, well, at this point, we would suggest changing the name. And here are some suggestions, of which we didn't like any of them. But then we had the idea of just taking the alcove off, because that was the part that people struggled with. And the reality was that if you were of the generation of donors and board members and people that supported us, the original people, they didn't call it Vogel, they called it the alcove. And if you were newer than that, everybody called it Vogel. They didn't really even know what alcove was. And alcove was always the sticking point, because when you would say, oh, I'm with Vogel alcove, they were like, what did you say? Nobody really understood the word alcove. And so what we decided to do in all of that was we just decided to rebrand. And actually, I had a lunch with a guy that was very, very senior in Boston Consulting. He's a past board member of ours, and he was helping me. And he was like, Karen, I'm the one that took donuts out of Dunkin'. So it worked out okay. And so that's kind of the beauty of it. And we kept our bird. Vogel is Vogel in German means bird. And so the bird has always been in an initial branding. That's why we adopted kind of the bird is that. And so, and it needed a kind of a modern look, and so that's kind of what we did. We changed the logo as well as the brand. And so then to how we figured out how to do the different sites, because we didn't want a lot of words and things on the logo, we decided to use color. So the main logo has blue, and that's the main colors of the organization. So anything that's all the organization is the blue bird. Redbird, of course, now has a red tail. So when we have anything that has to do with the Redbird, we use the logo with the red on it. And then our project up north is a collaboration with Family Gateway, another organization in town. Their colors are purple, so we use the purple color for the Family Gateway project. And then we will be doing a project with Salvation Army. They're red, white, and blue, but those colors were already taken, so we gave them yellow. So now we have 3 logos that we use. The blue one is for everybody. And then when we're specifically talking about one of the others, they have their own logo, and each of the programs is branded on signage there with their logo. So that's kind of the story of the rebranding. We've kind of taken it, some people get very serious about it and just spend a lot of money and change everything. And so we've eased into it because it wasn't that different. We're not changing the legal name of the organization. It'll stay Vogel Alcove. We left the website as vogelalcove.org. We're changing stationery and that kind of stuff as we need to change. We changed the front, the sign in the front. So any new things are being used with the new logo and the new branding as we inch into all the new sayings. So the new branding. So that's kind of the long story of how
well,
it's been a many years conversation.
But what I really appreciate in hearing that is that when you take your time, you're proving you're not taking it lightly. You really thought very methodically about it and thought about when would be the right time to do it. When you initially got approached about it, you had other things you wanted to accomplish at the time, so it was tabled. But I also appreciated that you said a lot of the newer folks that are in the organization already been calling it Vogel. So it was kind of, you were leaning into kind of what the trend was that was already happening to make that jump while keeping a name that has continuity with the organization. So it really sounds like, you were thoughtful, but you also balanced everything to really create the best of all worlds for anyone involved.
Yeah, we also took the step. I had conversations with the family of both of the founders, and neither of them had any issue about changing the name. They said, my mom wouldn't care. But I mean, it was important to take that step.
Absolutely. Well, respecting the history of the organization is really important. So I'm glad you added that, that one final caveat to that. And, I know that, you have mentioned a couple of times a little bit about the organization expanding services throughout the Metroplex. So talk a little bit with us about the new facility in Collin County.
So the news actually goes back to COVID, the conversation about COVID. And with COVID dollars for homelessness, the city of Dallas got funds, and they bought a old Candlewood Suite hotel And because during COVID, it was difficult to put homeless families and everybody in one room like a typical shelter is designed. So the idea came about to put them in hotels so that they each had their own room. And that was done during COVID. And so the city bought this hotel and then leased it to Family Gateway to move their family shelter there. And so they went about remodeling. And Family Gateway has been a partner of Vogel's because we provide the childcare for the families that are in their shelter, but they used to be right down the street from us here at our main campus. But with this new facility, they were going to all be north. And so we couldn't get the children down here. So they agreed to remodel the first floor and turn it into a childcare center. And then, but they don't do childcare. So they did an agreement with us for us to come in and actually run and operate the childcare center on the first floor. So we have an infant room, a toddler room, preschool room. We also do after school care there and a teen program in the 2 nights a week. And then we also do a Saturday program in the Saturday program in the mornings 2 times a month for families that are living there in the shelter. And then we're about to start a mommy and me program in the mornings for those that don't want to put their children in childcare, but we can provide some programming for them. So it's a different model of what we do here at the main campus because it's all about doing it inside the first floor of an emergency shelter, which is a learning experience in and of itself.
Can you what's one thing you have learned, because what's interesting is you're taking what happened in COVID and you're housing people in a different way that you never had before, but then you're also adding this layer of facilities and you're bringing in other collaborators, whether they're nonprofit or for-profit businesses. What have you learned as a leader and having such a substantial background both in childcare as well as homeless services? What have you learned as a leader through all that?
Well, I think is that you have to be flexible. And I told my staff as we began this journey that we didn't really know what this was going to look like. And I think the other thing is a good aspect of a good leader is you've got to be willing to tell your people you don't know. And we're going to learn this together. And that's exactly what we've done up there. It's like we have every other meeting a week, we have a meeting with Family Gateway and we set out to say, okay, well, let's see if this works. And well, that didn't work. So let's try this. And so you've just got to be willing to be flexible and listen and see. Just because you have assumptions about how you think people are going to respond to your programming, then you have to listen to what's actually happening and what they do. So for example, we thought that, we put a childcare there, a mother that is in a shelter would want their children to be put in somewhere where there's activities and that kind of thing. And that's not been, the mothers who are working don't have a choice, so they do put them there. But you're taking people that have been living in their cars or living somewhere else and then putting them in a shelter, and they're still in trauma. And so a lot of them keep their kids close. They don't want them, just like we thought we were going to be overrun with school age kids, but the moms are upstairs in the house. They can still come to our program, but they have them come up there and they keep them close. So that's when we're having to look at some different programming. That is not what either one of us, Family Gateway or Vogel, thought was going to happen, but that's what's happening. And so now we've got to look to see what's other ways we can provide programming based on what we're seeing and hearing from the families, rather than make them fit into the peg we have created. We are constantly changing that program up there. So at first we started with every Saturday and that wasn't working. So now we're going to do every other Saturday. A lot of it is just all about relationship building, and that takes time. And I think that's the other thing. We just have to create ways for us to create relationships so that they trust us, because when you're in trauma, you don't necessarily trust people, and you can understand that. So I think it's all about relationship building, which is in a nonprofit, whether you're doing fundraising or program, it's all about relationship.
Absolutely. And, I want to ask one more question tied to that before we talk about the Art Performance event. And that is, you had mentioned up there. So, Dallas, for anyone who's not familiar, the Dallas Metroplex is huge. It's probably geographically one of the biggest metro areas in the United States. What advice would you give to a nonprofit looking to expand its services in a new area of the same metropolitan area?
Well, I think you just got to do your research and realize that you need to reach out to that community. One of the other problems that we're getting into is, look, to me, it's one of the things has been find out where the county line is. A lot of things happen county by county. And so for those that aren't in literally in this particular location is a very strange place. It's a Dallas address. It is not in Dallas County. It is in Collin County. Dallas is across the street. Dallas County is across the street. So literally, if you walk out and go across the street, you're in another county. But when you start talking about putting programming there, it's like, okay, which county do I deal with this? And that can be very complicated. So that would be one thing, is find out, make sure you understand which jurisdictions you're going to be working with. But again, you just have to, again, create those relationships with new businesses, new people in those new areas, and let them know that you're there. And of course, with that particular one, that particular building, we didn't have a choice of where it was. We chose the location in Redbird, which is South Dallas. And we're very excited about that, because it's just being able to collaborate in something. You're going to do programming. One of the things I think the governing board was very smart about is they set the priority that we were going to expand, but we were going to expand through collaboration. And so I've been able to expand to we will have 4 properties, and I will not have to have created brick and mortar for any of them. The one in South Dallas, we received free rent inside the Redbird Mall that's being totally redone and reshaped. And if we would build it out, so we did raise capital money to build it out, but I didn't have to build a building. The one that's the 4th site will be with Salvation Army, and they're building the building for us as part of their 121 million revamp program they're doing. So I think the biggest thing is figure out the easiest way to do it, and the easiest way is to collaborate, not reinvent the wheel. So we've been able to, we'll literally be able to more than double our go from probably 200 kids a year to 500 kids a year, and we haven't had to do that with any brick and mortar outlay.
That's incredible. And I'm glad that you outlined, and I'm glad you went to South Dallas too, because what your strategy is really kind of varies depending on, the populace and the geography, and the geography that's around it. And, I think this is a good segue, because you were talking about expansion at the very end there. I think this is a good segue to talk about the art performance event, because you had mentioned at the top of the show that it used to be a much more substantial part of the overall operating budget. Like, it was the star, and ironically now your vehicle with stars is part of the ensemble. So it's, I really, I loved hearing the metamorphosis of the organization. So talk a little bit about the annual signature fundraiser that you all do, the art performance event.
Yeah, so just for those that are listening that are development people, you'll appreciate this. This is when I got here, the arts event was development. Everything in development, we had one person, and that was it. Annual fund and individual giving was considered miscellaneous income, because everything revolved around the arts event. And so we changed that and have grown substantially with our development. But it's, the event, we just did it. It was our 32nd annual, and people know the event. And so, yeah, that's it is a huge thing that we do. It's an arts performance event. The thing is that we've always brought in signature artists, and literally from Harry Belafonte early on to Sheryl Crow to the Beach Boys. We just had our last one, the Bare Naked Ladies, so it goes all over the map. Kenny Loggins to Travis Tritt to the Eli Young Band. I mean, you name it, we've had it, and 32 years at the arts event. And so it kind of revolves around bringing in named artists, and then we have a reception program and dinner, and then the artist, and then we have an after party. This year we had the Emerald City Band. We've had Mixmaster Mike for the after party. Last year we had a Elvis impersonator who was absolutely amazing. He won the contest in the country for that, and he did the after party. So anyway, it's a fun event. We've gone from the thing about the event, we've gone from kind of the very buttoned up kind of gala, from having it at the Meyerson. We had it at the Meyerson, which for those of you down here, it's the major symphony center downtown, and it's very symphony-ish. It's very
It's a
uh,
gorgeous space, but yes, it's very specific.
yes. And but then when COVID happened, so then we moved to hotel and did it there for a couple of years. And then COVID happened and we did it outside. And it just happened to be that the one that I had to cancel was the Beach Boys. And so we didn't cancel it. We just had them come the next year and we did it outside. And what better band to have outside than the Beach Boys? So we were able to do it. There's a venue right behind the Meyerson, and we did it in an amphitheater out there with the Beach Boys. After people came to that and wore flip-flops and shorts, they were like, we like this non-fancy event. And so the next couple of years we did it at Gillies and did country western. And so this year we kind of said, well, we're going to branch out from country and do something different. People like not having to wear the tux and the dress up and all of that. I think that's kind of a trend everywhere. Is people are kind of after COVID, they're done with that. Dress up, since they don't do it for work anymore. And and so this year we actually, because we were in Collin County, of course, the PGA has moved their headquarters and and they've built a brand new Omni PGA resort out there near their headquarters with a beautiful golf course and beautiful hotel. And so since we were now in Collin County, we said we're going to make people drive beyond the Galleria. And that was a big decision, quite honestly, in Dallas. But actually, people came. We had over 600 people attend, and it's a beautiful facility. People loved it. No one really complained about coming out there. And actually, some people made a day of it. They think they're going to Oklahoma. They really aren't. But Christmas not in Oklahoma. But some people that don't drive up there all the time. But anyway, and so we've kind of made a big shift this year, and it was well received.
What made you decide, though, that this was the time to shift not only locale, but also genres of music? In addition to COVID, because the music genre, what I've noticed with a lot of organizations when they do fundraising events, they tend to do one lane of music. And you have mentioned you have very many different lanes. So what made you decide, I'm going to shift to this specific genre for this year?
Well, quite honestly, I think the best thing we ever did was hire a production company, and we used the green room out of LA. And they will give us, so we don't actually say we're going to go to this genre. We just say this is the year, give us some acts, this is how much we can pay. People also, that's the other part. Everybody thinks that all these artists are going to donate because you're a great nonprofit. That is not true. And then everybody in the world on the board, and everybody, oh, well, you should get so-and-so, you should get so-and-so. Well, yeah, and you look at what they charge is way beyond the budget. So we use a production company. So we let them know this is the date we have, this is the facility, and who is available within our price range, and who do they know? And that's where the key is, because they do this for a living, and they do shows every single week from what they're doing. And so they know what artists do a good show, because what we found in our gala is people like to dance, they like music that they know, and they like, whether it's a huge name or not, as long as it's a party atmosphere and everybody loves it, that's what really makes the energy of the event. And so we depend heavily on our person. When she suggested the Bare Naked Ladies, I didn't know them other than their song on
A 1 week, yeah.
Yeah, and a couple of songs. But I'm telling you, people did not leave the dance floor. Everybody loved it. And the other thing is, what we found was, if you change the genre of music, you're also going to change the diversity of the organization, the diversity of the people coming, and you're also going to change the age. It was very interesting as we walked around our event, and I ran into the son of the founder who was there. And he was like grinning from ear to ear. And he said, Karen, we don't know anybody here. and I said, well, and he said, no, it's really a really good thing. They're all these new people. And so with the Bare Naked Ladies, it kind of brought people back to the 90s, and people that were telling me, I used to have these people at my, my high school dance or whatever. These were the people we danced to. So people loved it. And the other thing is they did a great show. So you can there's some artists that are great at music and they are wonderful writers and whatever, but they don't necessarily put on a great show. And that's what we depend on our person we hire to tell us these people are a great show. Even if we don't know the name, they're like, trust me, they will put on a great show. And that's what really you're looking for.
Absolutely. And I'm glad we're talking about that because I do have one question that kind of dovetails into that. And that is, what's a piece of advice you would give to a nonprofit or someone looking to engage outside of, hiring a production company, looking to engage a celebrity to be involved in their nonprofit event? What's one thing internally an organization can do?
Well, I think you need to be realistic. I think that's the one thing is that realistic because you're always going to say here, especially when you're dealing with celebrities, or artists, you're going to hear somebody say, oh, well, I've got an uncle that knows this person, or I can get to them. And every time it's like, you don't want to do that because you need to go straight and get the contract. The other thing is, I mean, we talked about construction company. I mean, a production company. When I first got here, we didn't have that. We sat in a room for days going over the writer for these people, whether they wanted M&Ms or green M&Ms in their room or whatever. But it was tedious with an attorney because we held the contract with the artist. The biggest thing we did was I no longer hold the contract with the artist. The artist contract is with the green room. And that is huge because those writers are awful to deal with because they are very, very technical on everything from setup to things. A good example of why this is important. Last year, we were at Gillies and Travis Tritt was supposed to come in. His bus broke down. I got a call. The event started at 5 o'clock on Saturday. I got him to call at 9:30 a.m. to say that Travis Tritt was stuck in Memphis. And he could not because his band had broken down and or the bus, and he doesn't do acoustic sets. So he couldn't just get on a plane and come. He had to have all his people. So they were canceling. This was 9 o'clock on the 9:30 on the morning of that. And so because we had the green room, they got on the phone with all the agents they know across the country. And the Eli Young band, they literally were in different parts of the country. They were not together, but they got them all together, had them fly in from wherever they were. And they were there at 4:30 on the stage doing sound check. And that would not have happened if I had held that contract. So it's just, you got to know people that know people and in that industry, because it is an industry that you're dealing with.
It is, and I'm really glad you shared that story. And that's for one reason, because a lot of organizations nonprofits struggle with that. Like, well, hiring this takes money away from the organization. And the fact of the matter is, if you had not had this great partnership with the Green Room, you may not have even had an event. So it is critical to spend strategically in the right places. And I think that's a really, really good, really good anecdote to share. And I know we're coming up on time, but I do want to end with one question for you. And that is, what is one thing all successful fundraising events have in common?
I think that to me, it's people walk away and understand what your nonprofit does and why it's important to the organization, that the mission is front and center in the organization. I think it's kind of tragic when you spend a lot of money to do an event and people walk away going, exactly who is this for? What did they do? So I think we do a good job of making sure part of that program in front of our donors is, this is the mission of Vogel Alco, and you are supporting this mission. So to me, it's mission focused, even though it's a fun party.
That's I'm sure Bare Naked Ladies did it. A mic drop moment. So with that, Karen, thank you so much for joining us. This was really, you gave such wonderful insights, and I can't thank you enough for the time today.
Oh, you're welcome. It's great to be with you.
Thank you. And for more information on how to support Vogel and their annual art performance event, please visit vogelalcove.org. And that will do it for this episode of Fun and Fundraising. I'm your host, Rob Giardinelli, reminding you to keep it fun, keep it interesting, and your guests will have a great time. Have a great day, everyone, and take care.